There are so many thank yous with which we want to end this evening. First of all, I want to say a massive thank you to Women's Studies and Chiara here in UCC for all you have done to make this evening and the book launch possible, alongside tomorrow's workshops. We know the hard work involved and we are really grateful. This project is very much rooted in women's studies in Ireland, where Martina and I first met well over 20 years ago. Thus, there is an absolute rightness in completing this journey under the aegis of women's studies. Thank yous to all the knitting groups who made hearts and wall hangings and postcards and elephants, which have given this exhibition its continuing and growing strength as a political undertaking. Thank you to county councillors across the country who followed Mary Howard's incisive action with Clare County Council in 2016, getting motions of support for the legislation sent into the government. Massive thank yous to Claire Daly, Aideen O'Sullivan, Liz Casson and Rona McCord, who have driven the bill from within the Dáil and who have supported our efforts unstintingly with near 100 PQs and endless other requests. Thank you to all who have chaired and contributed and spoken here this evening, and all the venue organisers across the other 10 settings, and to the many community groups who have come together to support the exhibitions by knitting, by working with wonderful secondary school teachers and their pupils, by baking for the events. Thank you to 5 families who have contacted us in the course of this project to speak of how the unexplained deaths of their partners and their mothers in our maternity hospitals with no inquest created an unspeakable burden on their shoulders down through the years, while those same hospitals escaped all accountability and scrutiny as to how those deaths had occurred. Thank you to the book's contributors, to my fellow editors Nadine and Rosemary, who've been infinitely patient with this project, to the Birth Project Group, which, like the Elephant Collective, has been such a fruitful and generous and, I may say, completely unfunded collaboration over this past decade. We didn't have a bean to do the Birth Project Group. We've had some beans. We've had 2,340 euro beans to do the Elephant Collective. That's how many beans we've had. Thank you. Thank yous to all the members of the Elephant Collective, to our magnificent documentary maker Anne-Marie Green, and her and our friends Eddie and Emma in Framework Films, to Mary for finishing the elephant border of the quilt in 2015 when she was actually quite ill. Thank yous to Anne Maxwell, who stood over and pressed that quilt when her sister was so ill, and still we got that exhibition opened on the 25th of November. Thank you to Martina for sitting there patiently for hours and hours and gazing at the stock photographs in the newspapers of all of our 8 women who have died so that she could capture their essence. Thank you to Doreen, who has done so much to bring together the craftwork element of this and who organised Access 2000 in Wexford Town on International Women's Day last year to send 500 postcards to Frances Fitzgerald's office. We were active. Thank you to Kate, who gave us our title. She gave us our name, the Elephant Collective. Thank you to Bridget, who has absolutely kept us on track and who has been relentless in her optimism and her determination to sell anything at all that could raise some of those 2,340 beans, such as we had them, and who organised tonight along with Martina, for which they both deserve tremendous thanks. Thank you to Janine, to Melissa, to many of the other students, Caroline, so many of the students in the audience who've kind of grown up and gone on to be midwives. Liz behind me here, thank you so much for sticking with it, for being the midwives you are. Thank yous to the families to whom we wrote in the autumn of 2014 to say we were going to set out on this road. They came along this road and we thank them for their trust in us and for all they have done to support us along the way. Sean, here tonight, with his children, has just been so stalwart and an absolute rock from exhibition to exhibition, and we want to thank Sean and his family. Thank you to Mary Kellett and her late mother Lucy. Lucy was grandmother to Tanya McCabe. A wonderful knitter was Lucy, who mourned her granddaughter's death for as long as she lived. To commemorate Tanya, Tanya has given some of Lucy's knitting to form part of the wall hanging, which was made in Tipperary town last month and which has travelled here today. Thank yous in abundance are owing to the midwives who completed the Birth Project Group online survey in 2014, coming off duty from shifts in hospitals across these two islands where they practice in frankly unsupportable circumstances. Too few staff, too few resources, too little of everything to enable them to give women all they fully needed, making their work not only extremely stressful, but frankly heart-wrenching. They came home from these dreadful shifts, weary to their bones, to record their views at length with searing honesty and thoughtfulness. If our survey had been conducted by hospital or HSE authorities, we know that midwives would have had to watch their step. Hospital managements and the HSE here ask for signed contracts with clauses on, quote, confidentiality, unquote, which read that, quote, unless acting on the instructions of the HSE, on no account shall you discuss or disclose any information of a confidential nature. So straight away, confidentiality is defined by echelons of power way above the heads of ordinary midwives in practice. Managements and senior staff determine what is to be confidential and in whose interests. Non-disclosure protects the confidentiality not of women and their babies, but rather protects the hospitals and institutions. Thank yous in abundance to our midwifery students who in these very same circumstances have sought to protect women from poor treatment and bullying behaviours, speaking out, as Melissa has explained so eloquently, and intervening as best they could, even though they have found themselves at the bottom of a too rigid hierarchy where they have been bullied and harassed in turn. This mode of control in Ireland has its origins in that social climate of the 1950s, where Sean O'Faolain wrote in the essay which launched the bell, dissent, independence of thought and veracity were hidden in the dust heaps of convention, timidity and wishful thinking. These same dust heaps promoted the gods who make their own importance, as Patrick Kavanagh wrote in his sonnet, The Epic. Though many might want to deny it and point to how modern we are here in Ireland, this dreary, dispiriting regime has continued down to the seemingly glossy present time, as we have heard and seen this evening. And the gods of senior maternity services management, the senior layers of the HSE and regulatory bodies making their own importance, while a blanket of silence has been wrapped around the truth. Through the quilt, we endeavoured to create a different space, one which could speak of truth, veracity, fearless generosity. From the autumn of 2014, I can say personally it was possibly the best teaching time I experienced, because before and after each lecture, student midwives were coming up to me with squares knitted by grannies, by Grace, our youngest knitter, 11 at the time, squares knitted by mothers, by friends, by students who love to knit, by students who, like me, could just about hold needles and wool together. And the squares came from elsewhere around the country, from Donegal, Sligo, Clare, Limerick, Kildare, Cork, Wexford, Kilkenny, Louth, and from beyond, England, Scotland, even Australia. We thank you, one and all. But we are also acutely aware of how the generosity and fearlessness in the thank yous they invoke have shaped an important political potential. These have all been simple, immediate gestures in response to a tragedy. A 10-centimetre square, a knitted elephant, a postcard, have coalesced into that rare event. Not politics as usual, of which we've heard a great deal this evening, but as Sheldon Woolen would have it, a collective political action to set in motion something that is vital to retrieve, caring now in structures which have come to care too little. In 1993 in England and Wales, that landmark policy document was published called Changing Childbirth, and we've heard it referred to this evening by our guests from the UK. The excitement of the 3 C's: choice, continuity of carer, control. If I'm to describe the 3 C's of Irish maternity services, how they've been governed and are governed still, I must state that too often they epitomise coercion and collusion, leading inevitably to a kind of corruption. Those are our 3 C's. When truths about loss and tragedy are hidden, the very act of hiding becomes a potent source of corruption. And Irish women as mothers have suffered too terribly down the long decades for us to permit those forms of corruption to continue any longer. All ye have done will change that. No more than we have mandatory open disclosure or mandatory corporate accountability from our hospitals and the HSE, we do not yet have this legislation for mandatory inquests. And our maternity hospitals stagger along, Byzantine in their complexity, utterly remote from the everyday concerns of women and families. Their reach is long and their avoidance of duty spectacularly misplaced. Their moral imagination is absent. Our moral imagination, however, is not absent, and our collective reach as citizens is longer. As citizens, we are making the demand for this legislation. We make this demand on our government. We make it on behalf of our families and our communities in the future, that they be spared the unutterable anguish that families like Sean's and like Bernard's have endured. This is simple and it is clear. Rejecting truth hiding, it speaks of honesty and openness and of truth-telling. Earlier today, 2 letters, flagged in red, express delivery, detailing all we have laid out here this evening, along with a copy each of the Untangling the Maternity Crisis book, made their way, as I say, by special delivery to the desks of the Minister for Justice and the Minister for Health. We expect this bill to be law by the end of the year, and when it becomes so, we will all celebrate an act of simple justice. Thank you.